Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. We're going way back in time as we go back to 1974 and talk about UFO's Phenomenon album. Request week here at the Metal Exchange, obviously the first Monday of the month. Happy November, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, it's this year really went quickly. They seem to be getting faster and faster, but it's been mostly a kind of back to normal kind of year, which we've talked about how long it would take for us to get there, and it seems like we're pretty much there. So, Prog Power's back. 70,000 Tons just announced that they're set to go on as planned in early next year. So we've, like we said last week, we've seen a couple of shows. So I think it's time to get back to normal. So 2022 has been, if nothing else, good for that.
Yeah, it definitely has been. And although I think things are normal in certain ways, I think in others they're just as crazy as ever. But that's a story for another podcast when we talk up the political exchange. But again, that's a story for another day. I have to say, this was an interesting week. There were two albums that really caught my ear, and I don't think that they could be on more different sides of the spectrum. First of all, Joe Lynn Turner. Obviously, I know you're familiar with his work with Yngwie. He's obviously, his time with Rainbow and Deep Purple. He came out with a solo album that I had been hearing quite a bit about, which is probably something I would not have listened to, but for the fact that people were saying this album, Belly of the Beast, was really, really good. And I have to be honest, I enjoyed the heck out of this thing. It was just a really straight up hard rocker, but like no bad songs. He sounds great for a guy who's obviously, he's got to be in his 60s at this point. Just a really, really solid release. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, a two-man project out of the black metal capital of the United States, St. Louis, Missouri, a band by the name of Storm Ruler. They came out with an album called Sacred Rites and Black Magic, and it was probably one of my favorite black metal albums that I've heard this year. I'm very picky with black metal, but I thought that they did enough to really make things interesting. They've got some acoustic guitar passages, some classical guitar on there. It's not just the same speed with the double bass drums and the harsh vocals throughout that just kind of make it totally bombastic. It was a very interesting listen, and I'll put something of theirs on my latest playlist, which I'll put up on Spotify so that everyone can kind of check this band out. They're a two-man band, as I mentioned, and not really getting much notoriety, so we're going to change that. What about you?
The return of bombastic.
Yes, it was time for it to come back. How about yourself? I know we kind of talked before, and you were saying that you kind of caught up on a lot. What did you have a chance to hear?
Yeah, I think I ran down what I had left last week, and I managed to listen to pretty much all of it. I really enjoyed the new Arena album with Damian Wilson on vocals. Always I'll listen to anything with him on it. And this was just good old-fashioned prog rock. At its best. It was just a very enjoyable experience. I also finally got a chance to listen to the new Avantasia album, A Paranormal Evening with the Moonflower Society. Say that 5 times fast. And this, as is usual with Avantasia, this is something that I'm definitely going to have to listen to a few more times before I get a real taste for it. But I will say on first listen, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Nothing really unexpected at this point, but when you have like a lot of my favorite vocalists in Tobias Sammet and Michael Kiske and Floor Jansen, you can't really go wrong. Bob Catley, who I really enjoy quite a bit. And then you have, Jeff Tate on here as well. And
your boy Ronnie Atkins.
Yeah, Ronnie Atkins, Ralph Sheepers, and I'm probably missing at least one other vocalist, but it's just such a great lineup of singers, and the songwriting is good. I definitely thought, at least in a spot or two, that there was some definite Ed Guy vibes, which was very welcome to hear. But this is something that I'm going to definitely have to listen to a few more times to really get like we've been using the word dense a lot lately, and I feel like Avantasia albums are usually pretty dense for symphonic power metal. So I definitely want to give that another listen. And same goes. I also listened to the new Avatarium album, Death Wears Your Sting, as well as Royal Hunt's Dystopia Part 2, and I enjoyed both of those. But again, I think this is something I'm going to want to have to listen to again as well. And shout out to Knops for the Virtual Symmetry recommendation. I listened to their self-titled album that came out this year, and it was quite good. It gave me some Seventh Wonder vibes, but maybe like a little bit crunchier, a little bit heavier, but definitely had those Seventh Wonder keyboard vibes, and the vocals kind of reminded me a little bit of Tommy Karavik. So I thought this was good. Did you get a chance to listen to this by any chance?
Yeah, it's funny. You had mentioned them earlier in the week to me, and when you did, I said, "Oh, I'm going to put this on," right? And so I hit play, and the first song is 20 minutes, and I had to jump into a meeting, so I didn't get very far into the album. I.e., I got through the first track before I had to run, and I got caught up. I did not get a chance to hear the rest of it, but on both of your recommendations, I will go back to it. I think that this is something that just skipped me or kind of passed me by. I was familiar with some of their older stuff, if memory serves correctly, but this was I didn't have a chance to really digest this. I did listen to the Royal Hunt. I did listen to some of the other albums that you mentioned, and I just wanted to say about Avantasia, it's interesting. I thought with that band, like when I first heard the Metal Opera, and I mentioned this when we talked about this in the archives, that album hit me like a ton of bricks the second I put it on. Just immediately sucked me in. What I found is that with their most recent albums, maybe their last 4 or 5 albums, it's taken me a longer time to really appreciate or even, dare I say, enjoy some of the material. I remember the first time I heard, what was the album the Scarecrow was on? Is that?
Was the name of the album The Scarecrow?
It might have been.
I know it was I think it was their third album after Metal Opera Part 2.
That song is now one of my favorite songs of all time. But I remember when I heard that disc, it didn't grab me because it was kind of a stark contrast to those first 2 albums. And that's obviously the style they've continued with. And although it's, in my opinion, fairly straightforward, it is dense. And I need repeated listens to really, I guess, appreciate some of that stuff. And it's a shame because in today's environment where there's just such a bombardment of new music, sometimes I don't give stuff the amount of listens that it otherwise warrants, and it's a shame because I should. But this one, because of the history and because of the fact that I did like this on its first listen, I'm going to go back to this again. Whereas, like the Royal Hunt album, I liked it. I just didn't think it was spectacular, and I don't know how much time I'm going to have to go back to that necessarily, even though obviously I like the band. It seemed like it was more in the same vein as the last album, which was good, but not great.
Yeah, well, I mean, being that it's part 2, it kind of makes sense. But I remember with part 1, I felt the same way after I listened to it the first time. But actually, the more I listened to it, the more it grabbed me. And just to try to mirror what you had to say about Avantasia, like it's the same thing. After the first 2 Metal Opera albums, I feel like they got like a lot more, I guess, just dense, for a lack of a better term. And it was The Scarecrow was that third full-length album. That I feel like the songs just got deeper and like more intricate. And the albums by Avantasia that I've enjoyed the most since then are the ones that I've listened to the most times or given the most time to get into. Probably Ghost Lights is probably my favorite, just because I listened to that album so many times in anticipation of seeing them live that album is just like ingrained in my head. I love that album so much, whereas I didn't listen to Moonglow nearly as much, and I enjoyed it, but I don't look back on it with as much favor, probably just because I didn't listen to it as much. So it'll be interesting. I definitely plan on going back and listening to this again. Same with the Royal Hunt, because like I said before, Dystopia Part 1 I didn't think much of the first time I listened to it, but I really ended up liking it, and I think it made it onto my top 50 or 20. I forgot where it landed in the top 50 last year, but it did end up making the list, which I didn't think it would after the first listen. It's just interesting how some things you listen to once, like that band that Jonas turned us onto. I'm blanking on their name. You sent me, you put one of their tracks on your latest playlist.
Yep.
That I've been listening to that that
Ascension.
song Sayonara, and
Yeah.
it's such a I mean, it's such a Dragon Force-esque song, but they do it so well. It's just so fun. So it's something like that. You just listen to it once and you just like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to feel any differently about this after 10 listens than I do after the first. But some of these
Right. No
other
better,
things,
no worse type of thing. Just
right?
enjoyable.
Yeah, and I never thought Avantasia would be that kind of band for me because like you said, those first two metal operas like just hit you over the head like a ton of bricks. But I think those felt more like standard power metal albums, whereas these more recent albums from them are really more like there's just a lot more pomp and circumstance, I guess.
More rock opera than it is just a collection of power metal tunes.
I've seen so many comparisons to Meatloaf with their newer albums, and I remember reading somewhere that Tobias tried to get Meatloaf to do. Wow. He wrote "Mystery of a Blood Red Rose" for Meatloaf.
Wow, I did not know that. That's cool.
And it was funny because I remember Knops when he started getting into Avantasia, he was like, "This sounds like a Meatloaf song," and I'm like, "Well, it's funny you should mention that because it was written for Meatloaf, and unfortunately, Meatloaf is no longer with us." And I think we had mentioned that when he passed, that he happens to be the father-in-law of Scott Ian of Anthrax, of all connections there. But Avantasia, great band.
Yeah, a long way of coming back to good stuff. Let's talk about some UFO. This was a really interesting request. It comes from listener Patrick Celsus. So thank you so much for the request. And we're going back, what is it? Almost 50 years. This album came out, May 1974. I can't believe that this album is nearly 50 years old. I think it makes it the second oldest album that we've covered after the Black Sabbath debut.
Don't forget about the Monkees.
Oh, yeah. How could I forget? I'm sorry. The second oldest metal album that we've done, unless you think that the Monkees are a precursor to metal, but I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of saying that. So second oldest metal album, third oldest album that we've done. And this is a band, I think, that is wildly underrated because they don't get the radio play that some of their other contemporaries got in terms of your Zeppelins and even your Deep Purples. These guys, best of my knowledge, I don't think I've ever heard them on classic rock radio.
This band, this was really like my first real deep dive into any of their stuff, and all I could think of while listening to it is like, how is this not on the radio with everything else? That, because I grew up on classic rock radio, 104.3 and 92.3, growing up on Long Island. My mom would listen to, I think it was actually 102.7 and 92.3 back in the day. And then there was some shifting around. But when I was a kid, those were the two classic rock stations. So, I figure if anything, I would have heard Dr. Doctor, but not even that. So this was really, just a brand new experience. Like I said last year, it's like listening to something new that happens to be quite old, which is always kind of fun to do. And I got like so many vibes from different classic rock bands that are so much more well known from. I mean, even now with like satellite radio, I don't really remember seeing UFO come on. I mean, not unless Eddie Trunk is DJing the show. I know he's a big UFO fan.
Well, to that point, my only real exposure to this band was Eddie Trunk's radio show that I used to listen to religiously when I was in college or law school, kind of driving late at night on a Friday night or even Saturday. He had a show for a bit. And that was my exposure to the band, though I got to be honest, I couldn't tell you what songs I heard 20 years ago. I just know that I was listening to this band and I probably knew 6 to 8, maybe 10 songs at the most, just because he would play them so much. And then, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but I'll kind of, I'll get to it now. I just remember the first time I saw Iron Maiden and I heard the intro tape and I said to myself, what in the hell is this song? It's amazing. And it just blew me away. And obviously it was Dr. Doctor, but that turned me on. I think it was the first time I saw them, but I know they've been using that as an intro tape for many, many, many years. But that was my introduction to the band in many respects. They have had a million lineup changes over the years. And really, Phil Mogg, the singer, who unfortunately is in ill health, as we've mentioned in the past, he's the one constant, the vocalist. Whereas this particular album, going back to 74, was Andy Parker on drums, Pete Way on bass, and the incomparable Michael Schenker on guitar, obviously founding member of or early member of the Scorpions, and then, would join UFO and be in and out of that band a million times and whatnot. I actually saw Michael Schenker on 70,000 Tons of Metal, of all places, in 2020. So I've got to see him live, but I never got to see him with UFO. And I think I had mentioned on the podcast, if this band was touring, I would definitely go see them. I really enjoyed this album a lot more than I thought I would. And it's just a shame that they were never bigger, or at least here in the States, because they're not mentioned with some of the bands that I mentioned earlier, and they don't get the radio play and the love that they probably deserved.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Oddly enough, like the last time we saw Iron Maiden, which was only a couple of weeks ago, when Dr. Doctor started playing, I mean, I thought that it was like an original Iron Maiden song, like a Paul Di'Anno era, because it sounded like it could have been off of the first Iron Maiden album or Killers. It kind of had that vibe, which is so interesting because there's also songs on Phenomenon that you would never mistake for an Iron Maiden song, but Dr. Doctor kind of fits that early Iron Maiden vibe. So
it's funny you mention that. Iron Maiden does a studio cover of the song as a B-side with Blaze Bayley singing.
Oh, yeah, I'd
And
like
it's
to hear that.
I will send it to you. In fact, I have to post it because I feel like it's something people, if they haven't heard, they need to hear. It's just a really, really good cover. And I loved it. And I'm not the biggest Blaze Bayley fan, but he just does a really good job on this particular track. And it's definitely worth a listen. So, the fan, obviously Maiden is a fan, and, they were kind of a precursor to Iron Maiden. So it makes sense. But we'll talk more about that song, when we get to it.
Yeah. Well, before we dig into the tracks, I got a little blurb from Patrick who
Awesome. Let's hear
who
it.
chose this, and he said he kept it short, but he said, I picked this album because as a kid it was one of my gateway albums into metal. I think just like with rock and metal as a whole, there is something as a whole for everyone. You've got your hard rock, some acoustic / folk-esque songs, and even a couple of space rock-esque tunes. And of course, Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom are absolute bangers, so I would make any excuse to listen to those. Thanks again. Funny enough, I'm seeing Michael Schenker in a couple of days, so perfect timing.
That's awesome.
Thanks
That's
again
really cool.
to Patrick, and we appreciate the request. And like I always say, I always enjoy kind of going back in time and listening to stuff that I just missed. And this happens to be another one of those albums. So yeah, let's dig in.
Well, and to that point, I think it's always hard to go back to certain bands when they have a massive discography. I mean, it's got to be more than 20, maybe close to 25 studio albums, something like that overall. So when you have a back catalog that's so large and, dare I say, daunting, it's hard to kind of find a place to start, right? And just to kind of expand on what I said, 22 studio albums, 14 live recordings, and over 20 million albums sold. But again, they're not as well known as many of the other bands that I'm sure we're going to mention, because many of these tracks did sound like somebody else to me. And they were clearly either borrowing from or got ripped off by these other bands in many respects. So it's interesting. Let's get into it. The album kicks off with a really kind of hard rocking song called Oh My. At least on my copy. And I say that because a lot of the stuff, I guess, that like my release of this album is kind of different than some of the other releases that have come out if that makes sense. In other words, I've seen releases where Too Young to Know is the starting track and Oh My is opening side 2. So I'm curious to know what you started with as your first song, because I've seen it go both ways.
Yeah, I just am noticing that now too. I thought maybe that I had something I had it in the wrong order, but I also have "Oh My" as the opening track. Which now that I know both songs, I feel like this song makes more sense as the first song. But the Wikipedia entry shows "Too Young to Know" as the first track.
Yeah, and
So
we can start there. I just know that my copy was, flipped. I mean, everything else is in order, but the first and the sixth track, kind of like the start to side 1 and side 2, were flipped. So take your pick. I'll be happy to discuss either one.
no, we can start with "Oh My" since that was the first track for both of us.
Yeah, really good hard rocking tune, and kind of sets the tone or sets the table for the rest of the album. Michael Schenker does a lot of bluesy guitar work here, and I think the comparisons to Jimmy Page are just, very apt, if that makes sense. But the difference is this particular song and one or two other songs as well also had like a real Southern rock feel to me. And I hear a lot of Creedence Clearwater Revival, a touch of Lynyrd Skynyrd maybe. But to me, what I noticed two particular things about this little track. Number one, I thought the guitars really, really shined. And number two, I thought the mix was just absolutely superb for an album that's 50 years old. Every instrument pops in its own way, and it would continue for the rest of the album.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing when a band that comes out with like a modern album and it doesn't sound as good as this album that came out in 1974. So
That's right.
I agree with you there. I got a lot of Lynyrd Skynyrd vibes from certain songs on this album. This one being one of them. I think there's another one a bit later on that was even more. But it's if I had listened to this album with no knowledge of the band, I'm not sure I would have guessed that they were from the UK and not like a Southern American rock band.
Oh, I agree. Not every track, but this one in particular, one or two others that I'll mention. But yeah, it's almost like a blend of Led Zeppelin and Lynyrd Skynyrd in a lot of these tracks, and at least to me. But I thought it was a cool opener. It's not my favorite track. It's a touch repetitive in many ways, but it's short enough that it doesn't feel like you're getting hit over the head, if that makes sense. Not my favorite track, but a good way to start the album.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page with you there. I would put it probably towards the back end of the songs that I enjoyed most on this album, but I also do agree that it's, I think it was maybe I was going to say the right choice for the first track, but maybe it wasn't initially how it was meant to be. Again, like I said, I think we'll talk more about it when we get up to it, but I think that to me, that Too Young to Know sounds better as an opening track to me, but I guess if you're looking at it as a vinyl record or a cassette tape, I mean, either song is kicking off the beginning of a side, regardless of which copy you have, I guess. So, but yeah, good tune. The follow-up song, Crystal Light, which is not about calorie-free fruit drinks, as if you could believe it. I really, really like this song. Their mellower songs to me are really good. Like I found myself really gravitating towards some of the more ballady stuff, and this one was one of them that I just really, really liked this one.
I will take it one step further. I will say this, and I'm going to lump Dr. Doctor into it for a second because that's the third track. Dr. Doctor is the best song on the album, and it's actually one of my favorite songs of all time. I am a huge mark for that particular song. It was too easy for me to choose that as the song of the week, as the one song I really knew off of the album going into it. Crystal Light is my song of the week. And the reason I'm choosing it is because every time I listen to it, I liked it the first time. I really liked it the second time. And by the end, I was like really looking forward to this track. There's a lot to like here. The intro reminds me of Boston, right? Which is a band that I kind of love, those first two Boston albums. And even though it's a slower number, I wouldn't call it a ballad. I would just say it's a little bit of a slower number. I think the verses are really awesome. I think that the use of the backing vocals, especially during the chorus is a nice touch, and it almost touches on gospel. Like I almost hear like the Elvis Presley gospel thing in certain spots on this track. Really bluesy solo, a la Jimmy Page, and the chorus just sticks in your head. It's my song of the week. I'm a big fan of this track, and I would have never guessed it. Going into the week, because I just didn't expect them to sound like this.
Well, I think everyone should fix themselves up a little calorie-free iced tea drink, and we'll give it a little bit of a listen.
I like it. Let's do it. There you have it. I think that's just a really, really solid tune. And as I mentioned, it's a precursor to just an all-time classic song. The one song I knew on this album, too easy to be the song of the week. But Dr. Doctor, man, an absolutely epic intro, epic riffs, amazing drumming, bass lines that are phenomenal, and arguably the best vocal performance on the entire album. And it's got the Metal Exchange Gallop. I mean, what's there not to like about Dr. Doctor?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like the first time I listened to this album was just like days after we had seen Iron Maiden, and I'm like, oh, well, that's where this song came from.
But every time I hear it, I feel like I get depressed because all of a sudden it ends. And no disrespect to Space Child, but I expect Maiden to come out and start playing Aces High. It just doesn't happen.
No, you just make your playlist. You do whatever you want.
It's my little world.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout out to Bob Ross.
The joy of iTunes. Oddly enough, the beginning of the song reminds me of an album that we talked about a really long time ago on our second episode, Cry for Freedom from the Walls of Jericho album by Halloween. The way that it kind of like starts out kind of like almost like mellow and spacey, and then it just like bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum gets right into the gallop, as you said. Of all things, that's just kind of what it reminds me of. It makes me wonder if maybe Wyke was a fan of UFO and maybe he borrowed that. I think Wyke co-wrote "Cry for Freedom" with Kai, if I remember correctly. But yeah, this is just a really great, just kick-ass song. Like, especially after the first two tracks, you'd never see this one coming if you didn't know any better, because the first track is kind of, like you said, has like that southern rock kind of vibe, and then the second track has this mellow southern rock kind of vibe, and then this one comes in and it sounds like we said before, like early Iron Maiden. Just a really good song. But we were talking during during Crystal Light there that neither one of us are going to choose it as our song of the week just because we felt like it was a little too easy. So you'll probably have noticed that it was the intro to the episode. So yeah, you chose Crystal Light. I'm going to choose something else, but not to take anything away. This is a real awesome song, and it's I have to say one of my favorite songs I've discovered in 2022. Just happens to be 48 years old.
And one other thing, I think, and it's a good point to mention it as we get into Space Child. Actually, it's a perfect time. All of these tracks sound so different from one another, and I think that was part of the charm for me. There was one or two on the back end that had a very similar feel, and they were right one after the other, ironically enough. But for the most part, the song sounds so different that it made it not only an enjoyable or a pleasant listen, but the songs really kind of jumped out because it wasn't like it wasn't like it was the same pacing and the same song over and over again. And Patrick mentioned it, Space Child, this has a whole like space, or I call it like a psychedelic vibe to it. It's almost like a vocal solo in spots, because it's just, I think the vocals kind of shine above something else, and it has this really slow payoff which builds to an extended guitar solo, which is kind of cool and interesting. I can't say this is my favorite track, but the vocals and the bass line, which the bass lines on this particular album, and I don't think I've mentioned it to this point, but the way that Pete Way's mixed in this album, the bass lines shine in a number of different tracks, this being one of them. And it's just, I don't know that he gets the love that a Michael Schenker is going to get, or a Phil Mogg, but he is fantastic and really kind of drives this ship forward.
Well said. The spaceship, if you will.
There you go.
Yeah, this is, again, kind of, I didn't like it quite as much as Crystal Light, but I do like it a lot as far as being another kind of softer tune. But this one, I think, has a little more technical prowess involved. Just a cool tune. Definitely has kind of that, like, that 70s, like, David Bowie, like glam rock, space rock kind of thing going on, but with like a Lynyrd Skynyrd kind of twist to it. So I thought this was pretty cool. And yeah, and you're totally right. Like every song just has like its own kind of
flavor.
Like, yeah, which is really cool. It made it hard to pick a favorite song for that reason. But I found that all the songs were really enjoyable in their own way.
Well, let's get to the end of side A, which is Rock Bottom. What do you think about this one?
Oh, Dwayne Johnson's favorite UFO song by far.
No question about that.
I did a little interview with him during a couple of shots of Terramana, and he said that he doesn't really want to talk about wrestling, but he does want to talk about how Rock Bottom is his favorite UFO song of all time. Some of that story may not be true.
But do you echo his imaginary sentiments is my question.
It's not my favorite UFO song of all time. It's pretty good. I don't think it's as good as Dr. Doctor, as far as I think this is the second, like, kind of fast paced or heavier tune on the album, or I guess it's the third if you count Oh My. This one, though, like, it's got the guitar solo, and this is really just kind of like a straight up 70s old rock tune. It's really quite good. It's just not my favorite. I like Dr. Doctor a smidge better, although I do like it better than Oh My.
What's interesting to me is that this is, in my opinion, like the heaviest song on the album, and it has a lot of a Black Sabbath feel to it in the spots. And especially when you think 1974, I mean, Sabbath was heavier, quote unquote, but this was close. And what was interesting is that they kind of help this bridge about midway through the song, which kind of brings us from a, dare I say, upbeat tune to kind of a dark place, kind of a dark element to the song, which I guess makes sense given the title, right? Rock bottom, and then just kind of the bottom falls out on you. And I almost wonder if it was done on purpose that way, where it starts off almost like heavy and upbeat and then just really gets kind of dark and gloomy. Then it starts to pick up again during the instrumental section before a cool outro. This is a good song. I actually like this one quite a bit. I would put it definitely in the top half of songs on the album, just because I thought it was a really creative bit of songwriting on their part.
Yeah, I thought the chorus was a little pedestrian, but on the other side of that, the guitar riffs during the chorus are really like heavy and memorable. So that kind of makes up for the fact that, like, the rock bottom vocal part that's just kind of boring and repetitive. It kind of gives it a little bit more life, and I think that's pretty cool. But like I said, like, besides Dr. Doctor, I really found myself enjoying the softer tunes more than the heavier tunes, which is, I guess, a little bit surprising.
So based on that, I'm going to assume that you didn't love Time on My Hands, which we'll call it the 6th track or the start of side B, because it's kind of in a similar vein. I'm sorry. I messed up. Nope, Too Young to Know, right? That's, I guess, how we're going to kick off the second side. This to me has a Skinner vibe to it, like through and through. Bluesy, Southern rock, awesome chorus, cool verses. This to me should have been their radio hit, and maybe it was. I don't know, but to me, this is the one that I can really just hear on classic rock radio even to this day. I thought it was a good start, and the reason I bring up Time on My Hands was because to me that was in a very similar vein as to Too Young to Know. So I kind of get them not confused, but I do think they blend into one another. But I'll talk about that in a little bit because I have something else I want to add. But Too Young to Know, what are your thoughts?
This was the one that really gave me the Skinner vibes for sure. Especially that kind of twangy guitar. But also a little bit of early Rush reminded me as well, just a touch, because early Rush has a totally different vibe than what they would. We talked about 2112, and I'm talking about even before that, like Working Man era. Has a little bit more of a more classic rock, like not as proggy just yet, more of a, kind of heavier, in the Led Zeppelin sort of vein, and really kind of not too far off from this. This was one of the songs I think I liked, most, on the album. Just, it really, like you said, like it really has that, like, accessible radio kind of flavor to it. Really solid tune. I like this one quite a bit.
So based on that,
but
logic,
that said, I do like "Oh My" better as the first track on the album. I think this is a better song, but I think it fits better in the middle than at the beginning.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Time on My Hands is actually one of your favorite tracks on the album, right? Because to me, it's a very similar vein, and it kind of reminds me of this like old drinking tune where you just want to go to the bar, grab a drink, and have Time on My Hands playing in the background. I'm not a big Scotch guy, but if I was a Scotch guy, I think I would want to drink it with this song on. Just one of my favorite guitar solos on the entire album, and the reason is because it's one of those things where Schenker's guitar almost sings to you as he's playing it. You can almost like feel the emotion dripping through that solo. I love this song, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that you did as well.
You hit the nail on the head. I happen to like this song quite a bit. What does it remind me of? It reminds me a little bit of like a chiller Led Zeppelin tune. Again, though, with a little bit of that kind of Southern rock kind of. I don't know if they're from Southern UK.
Maybe that's what Southern. It is. No, they're from London, so that would make sense now that you mention it.
Well, there you go. So it's still Southern rock, just not Southern American rock. Yeah, this is just like you said. It's just like a really chill song. Like maybe you have a glass of scotch, maybe you smoke a joint. I don't know. This is just like a really mellow kind of like, but just really kind of good. It almost reminds me of just like those really good like Grateful Dead songs that you could just kind of listen to, and it's just got a nice pace to it, and it's just a really enjoyable just like rock tune. Like it's mostly like acoustic guitar. Like it's just like, I don't know. You really know me, because this is I'm not going to make it my song of the week, but it is one of my favorite songs on this album for sure.
Nice. I had a feeling, and I'll say this: these tracks are all written by Schenker and Mogg, except track 8, which is called Built for Comfort. It's written by Willie Dixon, who is an American blues musician, vocalist, songwriter, etc. So I think there's a reason why this track is like kind of like a slower jam type of thing. I have some thoughts on this, but before I get to it, I want to hear your thoughts on Built for Comfort.
It was probably my least favorite song on the album, honestly. And that now that I realize that it was not written by a member of the band, it kind of makes sense to me. If you're into like that kind of like slow bluesy kind of classic rock with like the suggestive lyrics, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I don't know who exactly this reminds me of. I don't know if it's like a George Thorogood or something like that, with a little less
Never
punch
thought
to
we'd be
it.
discussing him on the Metal Exchange.
Yeah,
But here
well,
we
there you
are.
go. Yeah, I mean it's fine for what it is. It's just not really my favorite kind of song. So it's my least favorite song on an album that I enjoyed quite a bit. So
I agree with you, but I'll say one thing. I feel like this is the song that they should play live and just turn it into more of like an extended jam session, like something that a Fish or a Grateful Dead would do. This song, not my favorite on the album, but I feel like if I saw them play this live and just kind of extend the solos out and jam for a bit and then go back and end it, I think I would enjoy it more. But
yeah,
as produced on the album, the weakest of the 10
preferably
tracks.
preferably with that guy who was sitting in front of us at Iron Maiden who smoked so much pot that I'm almost positive I had a serious contact high for most of that show, because I was like,
And the walk home.
yeah, I was like, woo, feeling good. So
Sidebar: I don't think he could get up out of his seat. There were people actually trying to walk through the aisles, and I think he was literally just stuck to his seat because he was so out of his mind. But he obviously enjoyed Doctor then too.
yeah, well, his seat was built for comfort, not for speed.
There you go. I like
would
it.
say that. All I could think of when I was listening to this song is that scene in Wedding Crashers when Vince Vaughn is asking Owen Wilson if he did you motorboat him? Were they built for speed or comfort? That's just all I could think of when listening to the song. So
I love
thank you, Vince Vaughn, for ruining yet another song.
That brings us to Lipstick Traces, and there's a lot of suggestiveness, I think, throughout this album. This is the one instrumental track on the album, and it's perfectly situated for my money in terms of the placement on the album. Right before the last track, awesome guitar tone, awesome mix, and just this short little bluesy number that kind of fits perfectly, like almost like a glove, after the one song they didn't write, and then this epic track, which will ultimately be your song of the week, I think.
Yes, yeah, I like this a lot. Every time I listen to it, I'm like waiting for somebody to start singing, because I just feel like it would probably lend itself really well to some lyrics, but it still is great even without lyrics. It's just a really nice, well done, just like an enjoyable kind of like a guitar ballad, I guess you could put it. It's just has a very kind of countryish feel, countryish kind of twang to it, but really good guitar tones, like you mentioned. I just really enjoyed this, and I thought that it made for a great way to kick into Queen of the Deep, which I honestly thought you were going to choose as your song of the week. So I was kind of preparing myself to pick something else, but since you chose Crystal Light, I'm going to choose this instead. So we'll give it a quick listen, and then you can kind of chime in with your thoughts, and then I will follow up. So here it is, Queen of the Deep.
Heaven help the lucky one. Heaven help Had the news come on the radio about the lives in disaster plain, I'd already heard before, maybe 2 years ago.
That was an excellent choice for a song of the week. I like this one a lot as well. And what I liked about it is it was really your first taste of a true ballad on the album, at least the way that it starts. But then it kind of picks up almost like a power ballad, like one of the 80s power ballads, but in the UFO way. Phenomenal guitar solo. And I like how that after this extended instrumental section, they kind of go back into that driving riff that kind of permeates the beginning of the song. I just thought the whole thing was very well constructed, and a great way to kind of to end the album. Not my favorite track, but a very, very solid end. And I'm kind of curious twofold. Why did you think I was going to choose it? And B, what made you choose it yourself?
I thought you were going to choose it because I knew you were going to say choosing Doctor Doctor would be too easy. I just knew that you were going to say that. And I kind of agree because I felt the same way. I think if I not heard it at the Iron Maiden show and just went into this album not recognizing anything, I might have chosen it, but I almost felt like that almost disqualified it from contention.
Once it hit the PA system, it was all over.
Yeah, what are you going to do? So I don't know. I think I just thought you would pick it just because I liked it so much. I figured you probably liked it too. But again, it's another one of those songs that starts out really kind of mellow and unassuming, and then it picks up this this almost like kind of Rush-esque kind of riff, and then it kicks off a little bit more of a mid-tempo, like kind of like the meat and potatoes of the song. But just like that recurring guitar riff that goes on throughout the song, and then I just think like the vocal melodies are just so good. Like it just all comes together and makes for like this really great ending to this album, which is I found to be a really easy listen all the way through. It's pretty short. All the songs are pretty to the point. Nothing kind of drags on, and everything sounds different from one another. So like you don't really feel like you're listening to the same thing repeatedly. And then with this song at the end, you get a little bit of that kind of ballad, mellow, soft. I don't want to say soft rock, but kind of a softer tune at the beginning. Just your classic kind of just mid-tempo gate in the middle, and then towards the end, just more of that like really well done guitar like solo work and. Just overall, I think this was just a really good tune, and it was the one that I found myself really looking forward to listening to each time I went back and listened to this album.
And I'll say this, you talked about it being like an easy listen. I found myself wanting to listen to it at my office when I was at work, because it was the kind of thing where I could put it on and not be completely embarrassed when people would walk in and hear me listening to Storm Ruler, which I mentioned earlier, because I just didn't think that people would want to hear me listening to black metal in my office. So when I have something like this on, it was just a great album to work to, and it made me want to kind of go back and listen to some of their other stuff, because as daunting as it is with 21 other studio albums, there's a lot here that I feel like I'm missing that I would like. And to that point, I'm curious to see what you're going to give it on a scale of 1 to 10, because I wasn't sure what you would give it at the beginning of the week, but I have a feeling it's going to be better than you thought it was going to be now, having digested this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't have any idea what I was going to think about this, because in all honesty, like I really didn't know what to expect. But it really did catch me by surprise. And I think I was expecting it to be more hard rock, or just like more consistently hard rock. And there are hard rock songs on here, but there also is a lot of just chill, kind of mellow, just softer type rock music, which, as somebody who grew up listening to tons of classic rock, that is totally okay with me. I found myself actively looking forward to putting this on during the week, which is cool. It's not always. Sometimes some of the stuff we listen to, it stretches my my taste buds, I guess, to say the least. Speaking of black metal, certain things, or even like a band like
another one.
Yeah, like a band like Candlemass, where it's like, you kind of need to be in the right kind of headspace to kind of ingest it. Whereas I feel like this is it's just so easy to just take in. And so that all being said, I'm going to give this one, I'm going to give it a 7.25. I think this is going to be another one of those things that I end up going back to and enjoying more with time. But I just thought this was really solid, and I'm glad that Patrick chose it, because I'm not sure I would have ever listened to it, and God knows if either one of us would have ever even chose this to cover at some point. So just really glad to just add another like missed another missed album to the repertoire, if you will.
I'm with you. 7.5 for me. I really, really enjoyed it. And, like I said, it's the kind of band where I'm just going to go back while I'm at work and kind of have this stuff on. I was earlier this week, I listened to Genesis's, easy for me to say, Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. And I thought it was just a really interesting proggy listen at work, but this was even more enjoyable, when I would play it in the office, because it was just so straightforward and I didn't have to think that much, but you could just kind of immerse yourself in the sound. So good choice, good selection. Thanks for the request. And before we run, just a couple of news items. A lot of tour news, or so it seems. Normally we focus on the U.S. side of things, but just some European shows that were announced for next spring. A band that we've talked about briefly, although through the lens of Soen, and that's Slipknot, who is doing a tour next June. I think they're doing like a 2-week run of shows at a number of festivals out in Europe. I don't know. Like, they're so popular, but I can't say that I'm familiar with this band at all. And maybe I'm missing something, or maybe I just don't get the shtick, but they are huge, and they continue to be huge after 20 years.
Well, they wrote the best Soen song I've heard in a while, so
they got that going for them. And then coming back to American shores, death metal veterans Morbid Angel are embarking on a U.S. tour in early 2023. It starts on March 15th in Pensacola, Florida, winds up going back down to Florida on April 22nd. Part of me just thinks they're going to be on 70,000 tons because it just makes sense, and it would be a month before they embark on this tour. So I'll get myself ready for that. But yeah, those are just two of the bigger tours that are lined up for the spring. I'm curious because I know that you said you had some news items as well to kind of rapid fire at me. So bring them on, my friend. Let's hear.
All right. These are not planned. I am just pulling this up and just letting them rip. I don't know. I hadn't heard this, but did you know that they're working on a Nick Menza documentary?
No, really.
Yeah,
I had no idea. What's the premise or the driving force behind that?
It says that it's current. David Ellefson has said that it is currently being edited. It's going to be called "This Was My Life: The Story of Nick Menza." Ellefson's a co-producer. And it said it will provide narration, or he will provide narration to guide the viewer through the exploration of the late Megadeth drummer's life. Wow. It will consist of 8 or 9 songs built around Nick's unreleased drum riffs that Menza recorded for a project he started working on between 2013 and 2015. And Ellefson played bass on a few of the tracks and is also serving as the project's executive producer. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Let's see. What else do we have? I'm not reading this from my list here, but bands continue to roll out for 70,000 tons of metal, and I just saw recently Camelot and Corpaclani filling out the Ks, if you will. Did they announce any new bands today, by any chance?
Yeah, Uli John Roth was.
Oh,
announced.
Right, you mentioned that before.
But other than that, it's kind of been I don't know, like I never thought I would get to the point where I was not excited to see Camelot, and maybe it's because they're headlining Prague Power, so I knew I had that held in abeyance, but like that announcement should have excited me more, and it didn't. Not that it's bad by any means, but to me, Nightwish is definitely the draw with Insomnium at this point. Those first 2 bands that were announced, they were 2 for 2, and since then it's been a little bit lukewarm, although Uli John Roth will be cool, just, from the classic standpoint. Yeah.
Well, that band that is just Branches for a logo, I believe, is playing as well. So if you want to see Branches play on a boat, you should go see Branches.
Not a Rotting Christ fan, I can tell.
I didn't read Rotting Christ. I read Branches. I thought this was interesting. Sebastian Bach and Michael Sweet reconciled and played together on the Crispy Cruiser. Chris Cruz. No, I'm thinking of Terry Funk on WCW Saturday morning. Wow. The Kiss Cruise. And that's Cruise with a K.
I am all about burying the hatchet, so kudos to them. No offense to Sebastian, but at this point, Skid Row has a better singer, so I'm just not going to... What else can I say? But I'm glad they mended their fences.
Yeah, I mean, when stuff like that happens, all that does is that just benefits the fans, like, because they get
100%.
to see, Michael Kiske and Kai Hansen perform at Halloween, or maybe, I someday wish that we'll see like Nightwish be able to do what Halloween's doing and go on tour with all their ex-singers, or maybe Yngwie can do a tour with all of his ex-singers, all 76 of them. That could be fun.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're all lining up to work with him again.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure Soto is leading the pack, and the aforementioned Joe Lynn Turner is right behind him.
Yeah. This is an interesting quote. Rob Halford says the glam metal scene was confusing to watch as a closeted gay man.
I'm not touching that. All I'll say is it must have been interesting, because I mean, you don't, man, woman, you have no idea. But
I'm sure it was confusing for a non-closeted straight man. I mean, the styles of the 80s are, boy,
to be on the Sunset Strip in 1986.
Yeah, when they say like everything comes back, I could definitely see like ripped jeans coming back. I could see like flannel shirts coming back, but like that 80s, that big hair and the makeup and the neon outfits and the what do you ever call it? The frilly stuff that Randy Savage pulled it off, but everybody else, no, not so much. So,
but he did it in 1998. So how do you pull that off?
Yeah, well, when you're Randy Savage, you can pull off anything.
There you go.
Yeah, it looks like not too much else appears to be going on. John Bush thinks it would be cool to do some shows covering his time in Anthrax.
I would be very curious to see that myself. I'm not going to lie. I think I whatever he does, I love. I'm actually going to see Armored Saint in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. They're opening up for Wasp, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Anytime I can see him live is a treat.
Yeah, I would like to be able to do that myself at some point in time. Yeah, I guess we could wrap it up there. I think that's
right.
Enough.
Before we get to your selection for next week, as I feel like it's been some time, but before we get there, please keep the requests coming. Join us on Facebook. Join the chat. Lots of people putting out some really cool stuff. I think you'll want to check us out. Go to our Linktree page, and all of our links are there to all of our social media, our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook accounts, and obviously our Spotify playlists as well. But that brings us to next week, November 14th. What am I listening to this week?
Oh, wait. Just one last thing.
Okay.
Just to keep with the John Bush discussion. Apparently, Armored Saint has a official documentary coming out called Band of Brothers, and that will be released soon. So I just thought I would tack that on to
I like it. I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, so anyway, as far as next week goes, there's a band that we've already talked about that I want. It's one of those things where when I chose it the first time, it was like a difficult choice for which album to choose, and I think I went with one that you were surprised that I chose, because what I'm going to choose now was the more obvious choice, and that's Gamma Ray's Land of the Free. We talked about Somewhere Out in Space, and I happen to hold both albums in very high regard, and I think most people probably would call Land of the Free, like, to use a phrase we use very often, the magnum opus of Gamma Ray's discography. Sure. But I just feel like it just is one of those albums that just needs to be covered, I think, in full form. And being that I'm going to be away on vacation, I kind of wanted to choose something that wouldn't involve me having to listen to it a whole bunch of times, since I won't be sitting at my desk for a week. So here's an album that I really don't even need to listen to talk about.
So you're cheating. No,
Yeah.
I think that's a great choice. I'm shocked. We're almost 125 episodes in and we have not discussed this album, so it's definitely long overdue. I have a little bit of worry, though, I'll be honest, and I'll just put it up front and I'll kind of set the stage for next week. I have, in my head, hold this album in such high regard, but I haven't listened to it in forever. Like, I'll be honest, I just haven't listened to it in forever. I hope that I enjoy it as much as I used to. Not that I played it out, but I did play this album a ton. I'm really wondering what some of those deeper cuts towards the middle and back of the album are going to be like after almost 25 years for me, and then obviously almost 30 years that the album's been out. It's going to be an interesting listen because it's been a while, and quite frankly, even Gamma Ray on a whole has been a while. I don't think I've listened to them since we did Somewhere Out in Space, probably a year ago at this point, if not more.
Yeah, I've always considered Land of the Free, Somewhere Out in Space, and Power Plant like the great Gamma Ray trilogy. I think that's when the band really found their sound, and I think the fact that Kai Hansen became the full-time vocalist on Land of the Free kind of has something to do with that. But this was my first Gamma Ray album and my first experience listening to them. So I like I said to you before, like I have like probably 400 albums that are tied for the album I want to talk about next, and this just happened to be in that log jam.
I want to be clear. We're not talking about Land of the Free 2, right? We're just talking about the original.
Of course, yes.
Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, because then I'd have to actually do prep if we were doing Land of the Free 2. I do not know.
I'm not sure I want to listen to that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know that nearly as well. I know there's one song on that album that I think it was Rain, if that's the album I'm thinking of, that I really, really like. But the later Gamma Ray albums, it was almost like, for me, there was always like a handful of songs I really liked, and the rest was kind of forgettable. But these three especially, and I'll finish the trilogy at some point and probably ask you to do an episode of Power Plant with me, because I also feel like that it just deserves to be in the discussion with these other two. Yeah, like I don't feel like anything Gamma Ray's done since those three albums have come close to being as good as these three. So
no argument from me. Most importantly, enjoy your time off. Get some much needed R&R and enjoy that southern heat. Where are you going?
We are going on a cruise to not a barge to hell, mind you, but just a regular old cruise. We're going to the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Grand Cayman. So we have a few excursions planned in each of the different islands, and we have a room with a balcony
Nice.
somewhere right in the middle of this 15 tiered monstrosity. I still
First cruise?
yeah. I can't. I have such a hard time wrapping my head around how they get these things to float. It's amazing. But I'm really excited about it. I've gone from being somebody who didn't even like getting on an airplane to now like being excited about getting on a plane, flying to Florida, getting on a boat. Boats have never been an issue for me, so that part, just hoping I don't get like seasick or anything, because other than that, I'm just like very, very excited, and I haven't had like a real proper vacation where I wasn't actually working or like I think the last trip I went to, when I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, I worked while I was there. I recorded an episode of the podcast while I was there. It's like it's been a while. I think probably Hilton Head was the last time I've just had like a proper no work, no BS, just vacation. So it's been a long time coming.
Well deserved. Enjoy your trip. and we'll come back next week and talk some classic gamma ray. Enjoy your week, bud. I will catch up with you soon.
All right. Take care, buddy.